And while the world's focus has shifted to Ukraine, Israel still keeping a close eye on Iran and the negotiations in Vienna. Joining us now to discuss what lessons Israel can draw from the Russia-Ukraine war is Likud member of Knesset and former mayor of Jerusalem, Nir Barkat. Thank you for joining us.
My honor and pleasure.
So I want to address the Russian invasion of Ukraine first. I mean, what do you think of the government's decision to stay relatively silent for the first week of the invasion, especially when the United States and the rest of the world have been condemning Russia's actions pretty loud and clear?
Well, as a grandson of Holocaust survivors that lost 30 members of their family in Poland, in Auschwitz, Israel and me as a Jew cannot stand on the sideline on such an aggressive attack against Ukraine. And we must be part of the big, large coalition of the Western world defending and helping Ukraine against the Russian aggression. So that's my perspective, my point of view, that I believe that the Israeli government should follow.
And what about Israel's coordination with Russia in Syria? I mean, how does that factor in your opinion?
Well, even before that, with your permission, there's another country in the world, regime in Iran, that threatens to wipe out Israel. They're threatening to go to war against Israel. And by the way, we're called the small Satan by Iran, and the Western world is the large Satan. So we have another very aggressive regime that wants to go to war, that is using terror to hit innocent people. And my question to the world is, do we want to put sanctions after Iran attacks Israel? Or have we learned our lesson and put sanctions, not lift sanctions, but put sanctions on Iran to eliminate them for going to war? That's the message the world should send to Iran.
And now, I mean, speaking of Iran, you're flying soon to the United States to meet with congressmen and Senate members to address the JCPOA. I mean, what is your goal with this visit?
Well, basically to, again, to open up people's eyes and understand that Iran is trying to target Israel with a conventional war, with 250,000 rockets around us, and we will never agree to such an aggressive attack. We have to fight Iran and make sure they understand that they will pay a heavy price, not just with sanctions. Israel knows how to target and hit back, but we need the world to align with us to prevent the next war and attack from Iran. This is the message I have, not just in the United States, but to all of the world. And we're going to join the forces with the Western world, align against the aggression of Russia, and we expect the world to do exactly the same against the aggression from Iran.
And yet, it seems that a deal is coming soon. It's taking shape. The deal may be in 2 weeks, but would any deal be acceptable or good for Israel, in your opinion?
You tell me. I mean, the Iranians will tell you anything you want to know and tell you anything you want to hear. When they teach their kids to commit suicide, lying is a piece of cake. It's not a problem. And we learned that all regimes so far, none of them stuck to any agreement. Their declared goal is to wipe out the state of Israel. I believe them. As many people did not believe that Russia will actually execute on what they said they will do, hopefully the world will wake up and understand and believe the regime in Iran that they indeed plan to attack Israel, both with a nuclear power. They want the nuclear power in order to attack Israel, not for their own defense. And they intend to use their proxies to hit Israel because they want to hit us hard. The way, unfortunately, that has happened now right in front of our eyes in Ukraine.
Now, drawing upon that, and as you've just said, I mean, many analysts also believe that Iran is feeling emboldened in Vienna because of the West's lack of force against Russia during the invasion. I mean, would you agree, and what would you do different?
Well, what I would say is as long as Iran plans to target Israel, the small Satan, and then the West, the large Satan, as long as that's their declared strategy, you have to put sanctions on them, prevent them from having a bomb, and make sure they understand that they cannot use their proxies for terror against Israel or against the world. And unfortunately, the deal shaping doesn't even deal with the conventional threat around Israel with 250,000 rockets. It's not even on as part of the plan. And they intend to use it the same way that Russia did. They mean what they say, and they say what they mean, and we must put the sanctions before the war with Iran. And hopefully the world understood for what happened right now that we must not wait. We must not wait for an attack to happen to put sanctions.
Now, if a deal is actually signed with Iran in Vienna, I mean, how will this affect Israel's foreign policy and its regional defense policy? I mean, are we looking at perhaps a war in the near future between Israel and Iran?
I hope the world is not as naive as it looks, that now realizes that radical or very aggressive countries use their power and go to war. We have one in Ukraine. And why do you think that Iran, seeing the situation, is not planning and will execute their plans to hit and target Israel? They will do that. We know. I believe them. I believe the Hezbollah in Lebanon, that they want to use all those 250,000 rockets and target Israeli citizens, innocent children and women in Israeli cities and towns all over the country. I believe them. And we don't believe that they intend to fulfill the agreement signed. And by the way, the conventional threat is not part of the deal. And they intend to use those 250,000 rockets and have tens of thousands of Israelis victims hurt. The world doesn't understand that. Hopefully the world will open the eyes. Now we will join the coalition against the Russian aggression. We expect all the world to join us against the Iranian threat.
Absolutely. And now I have just one final question. I mean, your trip to the United States is reminiscent of former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's trip to Congress in 2015. Is this perhaps your first step towards a future campaign for the Prime Minister's office?
No, it's defending our country. I fly to the States often. I have many, thank God, I have many friends in Washington. And we have a great relationship. They listen. And I believe that the goal I have right now is to give another perspective on this. I'm part of the Israeli opposition. We have a different perspective than the current government. But in these things, we're all together. It's the same threat. So I'm going to voice my perspective, and I'm sure that it's going to be received with open ears.
All right, Member of Knesset Nir Barkat, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you very much.